Patch 1.10 has been a funny patch as we wait for the next expansion and the start of the Legend of Runeterra's first major tournament. I was debating whether to make this top 10 as it's a strange little meta right now, but I know this is your favourite series, so I thought go on then. So this is Top 10 Decks Patch 1.15. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. This video has been done in collaboration with Bomber TV. Fiora Shen deck remains pretty unchanged for quite a while now, and is obviously still a good spot in the meta, being one of the very few, if not only, mid-range decks that are really viable at the moment. Fiora Shen did not get hit in this patch, but due to the nerf to control strategies and the rise of aggro and mid-range, this is a fair contender in this meta. This is your standard mid-range deck featuring cards from Demacia and Iona. The main cost of the cards are spread in a typical way for a mid-range deck with a strong ramp to mid-game. Value and flexibility are the keywords in this deck. Take as many value trades as possible, which is very easy with challenges such as Screeching Dragon or even Fiora. Try to give your cards barrier with cards like Shen and Riposte. This should basically keep them alive and allow you to build up a strong army to win in your mid-game peak. Another way you can keep your units alive is through quick attack, and Young Witch gives you access to this, and she's actually one of my favourite cards with the Targon release. Link this card with a challenger such as Laurent Protege, and to basically have combats that suit you and to take out your opponent by obviously quick attack, hitting them before they can hit you. There's also lots of tricks to take advantage and punish your opponent's play, like single combat and sharp sight. You also have tools to counter big win condition spells with Deny, and in some of this, Nopify, but this Nopify doesn't appear in the deck code I'm providing you today, and this obviously can deal with the smaller spells. But if value doesn't win you the game, you also have the Fiora win condition, which is easily achievable with all the protection the barrier archetype provides. Fiora wins a game when it destroys 4 units, which should be easier with the barrier cards that you've basically got so much access to in this deck. Overall, it's a very solid deck fitting most playstyles and players. Tahm Soraka struggles to find a higher ranking on this list in the current meta, but I mainly feel this is down to it being a pretty hard deck to play successfully, otherwise I think it could be very successful. This is Tahm, Kench and Soraka Star Spring. It's a control deck with a very low average mana cost, with everything costing 4 or less mana. It's also the first deck I'm reviewing that has a landmark. It just so happens this landmark is pivotal to the deck succeeding. Some changes here and there in the meta made it possible for a sleeping archetype like this one to finally shine. This deck has several options to go for the win. Pure value is generated by both Soraka for a fantastic healing, and also by Tahm Kench removing a unit per turn, whilst you can also heal him with Soraka to keep him alive. Alternatively, you can go for a big Star Spring finisher, which in my opinion is the flashy way to finish and a fantastic way to flex in Legends of Runeterra. For those of you not familiar with the card, it heals all your damaged allies by 1 at the end of the turn, and if you heal 22 damage in the whole game, using any of your healing cards, you win the game. It's a combo deck at its core, but it also has some control tools to face aggro strategies, mainly Broad-Backed Protector, providing both synergies to self-damaging, to then obviously have targets to heal, as well as keeping your Nexus healthy, and also being an okay blocker with some solid health. You also have lots of tools to protect your combo pieces, such as Bastion for buffing and spell shields, Astral Protection for healing and buffing, Sunblessed Vigor for buffing, and Guiding Touch for healing and drawing. Loads of tools in this deck. This is a reliable deck which loses in the early game, or it's pretty much unstoppable if you do get past this early game stage. I know this seems a bit surprising due to the number of low mana cards this deck has, having a weak early game. Obviously decks that normally have lower cost thrive in this part of the game. Noxus Targon, or Decisive Targon Aggro, has a game plan which is pretty simple. You're looking to rush your opponent, overwhelm him with damage, both figuratively and literally. The deck has a reflective average mana cost for an aggro deck, with 28 out of the 14 costing 3 or less mana. It's actually a very budget deck with no exotic cards and 19 commons. It's crucial to get your 1-drops such as Fiora Soldier and Precious Pet, especially if you go first, as these can deal massive amounts of damage early on. Fiora Soldier will be a 3/3 on the first turn if summoned first, which obviously it will be on the first turn, and Precious Pet's Fear means almost no 1-drops can actually block it. If you don't get them in your opening hand, mulligan everything away to find them. Repeat the process for 2-drops, and by that I mean mulligan everything away except the 1-drop you already kept. You're going to be looking for your cards such as House Spider, Mountain Goat, and Fiora Shield Bearer. Ideally you want your 1, 2, 3 and 4 drops in your opening hand for basically a really nice sweet curve which aggro decks are best known for. All your 3 and 4 drops have Overwhelm, including Draven when he levels up, and Crescent Guardian when Nightfall is activated. Occasionally you also want to maybe keep your Darius instead of a 3 or 4 drop, as in some matchups you also have to need a finisher by turn 6, and obviously this depends on the situation you're in. This can be supported by Decimate later in the game, which is obviously designed to close the game as quickly as possible with direct damage to the opponent's Nexus. Decisive Maneuver can also be a fantastic way of closing the game, stunning an opponent's unit and buffing all your cards, which will most likely have Overwhelm, where basically every piece of damage they get was beneficial. The 1 health nerf to both Trundle and Ridering Stones was huge, which resulted in cutting off Ridering Stones and decreasing the viability of the deck in general, which was omnipresent in the meta before. But we've seen quite a lot of changes to this archetype now, and it's actually become a lot healthier and still valuable, hence appearing on this top 10 list. This is your standard flailed Shadow Isles control deck featuring the new Feel the Rush card, which came out with the NDA event. It's quite an expensive deck featuring 6 champions and 5 exotics. It's also quite expensive mana wise too, with 12 cards costing 7+ mana. With this deck, there's not much going on. You simply control the board against aggro strategies with AoE such as Avalanche, Withering Wail, and Icequake. You can also heal with some of your other removals such as Vile Feast and Withering Wail. This is where the Shadow Isles thrives at keeping you alive to that late game control peak. Ram thanks to Ridering Stones and Catalyst of Ions. Ridering Stones is still a solid option and needed for this deck despite the recent nerf to its health. Later on your win condition is Feel the Rush or Call of the War Mother in other variations of this deck. You can feature either card depending on which of these finishes you prefer. It isn't recommended having both of these cards, otherwise your hand will be filled with basically too many expensive dead spell cards in your hand in the early game which you obviously won't be able to use. Failing this, simply overwhelm your opponent with Trundle and Tryndamere, and use Atrocity to finish things off as well. With the nerfs to other aggro strategies, this archetype received a buff to one of its components, Cygnus the Moonstalker, so this remains one of the most efficient and one of the only aggro decks to counter and keep in check all the other control archetypes. If you're looking to counter Aurelion Sol, or in that matter, any control deck, or simply take advantage of the Nightfall mechanics, then this is the deck for you. So today I'm going to start off with a Nightfall themed deck. It consists of cards from Targon and Shadow Isles and features Diana and Nocturne. This deck is very aggressive and has a reflective average mana cost, with 32 cards costing 3 or below. This deck has a somewhat strange pace. You usually start the first turns by passing and banking mana, only to later unleash a ton of Nightfall threats. It's important to keep your Nightfall activators, which are Lunari Dustbringer, Solari Soldier, and Stalking Shadows, in your hands. These are Nightfall activators as they're the cards that don't actually have the Nightfall effect, therefore they get value out of being played first in the round, unlike most of the other cards in this deck. Fading Memories is by far the strongest Nightfall activator as it costs 0 mana.
Even if you don't play the ally you're copying, 0 mana Nightfall triggers are insane, so therefore are times when even if you go first and you have a 1-drop, you could actually be passive, as this will translate to even more Nightfall triggers later on. Nightfall triggers are so valuable because the Nightfall effects can be devastating. Diana can remove 1 unit per attacking turn, whilst Nocturne should be used more as a finisher combined with other cheap units to make all blocking units unable to block fearsome, and basically deliver an unblockable one-shot. Every aggressive deck in Runeterra should have at least 1 bit of burn, and this role is filled perfectly by Doom Beast, Unspeakable Horror, and Atrocity. The last one is the best combined with Nocturne or a Nightfall buff Diana, so make sure you use Atrocity at the right time.
Nightfall Aggro is like an evergreen deck in the meta, and it continues to be among the first spots on the tier list, and it always seems to find a way of coming back, which is why again we're seeing it on this fairly high spot on the list. So this is Go Hard Shadow Isles Bilgewater featuring Elise and Twisted Fate. It's pretty much a combo deck. When control decks start to become a bit more dominant, they serve as a counter to those slow strategies as they leave you with enough time to go for your combo. This is where this deck falls in. It has a low average mana cost with all but 3 cards costing 4 or less mana, and it's actually quite an expensive deck with 6 exotics and 6 champions. So this deck is a pretty unique concept featuring the new KDR card, Go Hard. It's a slow spell that drains 1 from a unit and shuffles 2 identical copies into the deck. Once cast 3 times, it transforms into the very OP Pack Your Bags, which I'll discuss later on. The aim of the deck is to play your standard control Shadow Isles playstyle, or focus on the Go Hard card mechanic. You'll want to keep drawing cards to get to your magic 3 as quickly as possible through Twisted Fate's blue card, or Bilgewater draw cards like Salvage. From that simple idea, the deck basically builds on itself. You have control tools from Shadow Isles like Vengeance and Go Hard itself. So use Vengeance to take out key units, and Go Hard to drain your opponents an excess 3 times each time you activate, before doing the big combo piece, Pack Your Bags, which deals 5 to all enemies and the opposing Nexus, before turning back all other copies of the card into Go Hard once again for the cycle to repeat. This deck has a lot of draw tools from Bilgewater, like Pool Shark and Salvage. You're not aiming to go deep with this deck, so ignore the fact that Salvage tosses 2 cards, you're just focusing on the draws here to get the Go Hards. The rest of the cards are mostly there for curve purposes. Your main plan is to either level up Twisted Fate, or go to the Go Hard game plan. Definitely a fun deck and quite a successful one too. Finally, we see this deck lose consistency and dethrone from being the #1 deck it was a few patches ago. But of course, it's still a very viable deck, and I expect this to continue for the remainder of this patch. This is Fiora Aggro, and it's been here for a while now, featuring cards from Noxus and Bilgewater. Patch 1.11 did nerf the very strong card in this deck, Petty Officer. However, it still remains extremely viable, and whilst it didn't actually affect the deck too much then, now in patch 1.12 we drop him for Iron Ballista, and we continue to see the addition of Cracksort Corsair, which was buffed in the previous patch. The power cards here are Misfortune and Gangplank. Even if Misfortune will have a very hard time leveling up here, she's just here to be a more consistent way to level up Gangplank and to make your board wide and threatening as possible during your attacking turns, whilst Gangplank can end the game with against wide boards and therefore making an aggro mirror much easier to deal with. This deck has a lot of ways to end the game with burn units like Imperial Demolitionist or Jack the Winner. You also have Zap Sprayfin, which is a great way of finding your burn spells like Noxus for 4 and Make It Rain. Finish off the game with the biggest burn spell in the deck, Decimate. Scouts has returned to the meta and actually stayed here for a couple of patches now. In fact, it was never actually nerfed significantly, and if it wasn't for Genevieve Elmhart a while ago, which was significant but not enough to stop this deck flickering in this S tier space. Scouts has been staple since the release of Bilgewater, defining what the aggro strategy to beat is. This deck has an incredible curve benefiting from all the great units coming from Demacia. It's basically Mono Demacia featuring 3 copies of Misfortune. In patch 1.12, the playstyle of this deck has not changed much, but seems to have success due to mid-range doing well in the current meta. On the mulligan, you always want to keep Misfortune and Quinn, as those are key cards in the deck, but it's also important to have your 1-drops, Fleet Feather Tracker in particular, so you can also swap your Quinn for a Lucian if you feel Lucian suits your playstyle better, so a little bit of flexibility here. You want to level up Misfortune as fast as possible, which is always great if you want to attack with your scouts. So don't worry about killing your scouts, because basically you just need to get those attack rounds in as much as possible. You also have a lot of ways to generate value thanks to your tricks. Ranger's Resolve to counter AoEs and get value trades on wide blocks. And you've also got single combat to remove their key cards, often getting a value trade by doing that. There's also Riposte as a way to shield from removal and deal bonus damage. And finally back to back, which is amazing if casted on your scout units, as they benefit from double the amount from that. Obviously they're getting 2 attacks, so double the bonus. This deck is currently the only survivor of many aggressive decks that were nerfed in recent patches, and as such it's the best performing one. This is probably the best option to go into ranked with right now. In fact, it's also the main deck of Bomber TV, and you got the rune rate that we showed just previous to this using in its streams, which you can obviously view. This deck remains untouched from balance changes, so its popularity has continued to rise. Discard Aggro has seen a rebirth in some basically more recent patches, and it's still a good contender even in the Targon meta. It features cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus, with all but 2 cards costing 4 or less mana. It's got a nice addition, which is Poro Cannon, which both synergizes with discard mechanics and gives you cheap elusive units to go wide and then buff all your wide buffs, which basically makes it a natural fit in this strategy. Also, it's not unusual to take your opponent off guard and discard cards like Vision or Flame Chompers in a moment where you're at 0 mana and your opponent does not expect any reaction from you, which can lead to some quite extreme punishes if you time it right. Other than that, the game plan has not changed from recent patches. Go wide early thanks to Rummage, discarding cards like Jury Rig or Flame Chompers. After this, then buff your wide board thanks to Vision or Arena Battlecaster. Finally, when you're running out of steam, refill with Augmented Experimenter, the most expensive card in this deck. Overall, it's a pretty fast deck, and its refill capabilities can make mid-range matchups easier, which have been popping up more lately. In the last 2 videos, we bet that this deck would actually become one of the most popular and effective decks in the meta, and both mine and Bomber predicted this, and it's actually already becoming true, as Bomber TV can testify in the number of mirror matches that he's already seen, which of course you can also see with his streaming now. Ezreal Swain is something new that we're trying, so this is the exact death list and win rate that Bomber TV has with this deck. The general statistics are still analysed by Bomber TV, but he still believes this archetype should be the top despite his personal success with the archetype. So this is a bit of a Legend of Runeterra deck exclusive review for you that you probably won't see anywhere else, for a bit at least, until everyone else finds out about it. With that said, the insane buff to Ezreal made this deck in particular shine, as Ezreal was coming onto scene much earlier, and this means you have access to more Nexus damage triggers for Swain to stun the whole board. So this makes a deck which was never really that bad at all become even more relevant in this meta. As for the deck analysis, this deck functionally behaves like Swain Twisted Fate, but it's obviously got different region in the form of Piltover and Zorn, so this means it has access to much meta burn tools which will obviously deal non-combat damage, so like Static Shock and Get Excited for example. This deck is mainly consisting of spells, as you want to remove your opponent's units playing them with basically using fast spells to take them out and punish them for attacking. So if they develop instead, you can punish them for wide blockers such as House Spider and Arachnoid Sentry, stunning a threat or adding a blocker to the board to basically stall the game as long as you need. Then to finish off, slap on a Leviathan, Swain, and or Ezreal onto the board, and the win should come very soon after this. So it's definitely a great deck, and Bomber TV personal recommendation. So there we go guys, that was the latest top 10 decks list. It was nice having a chance to review a new deck which I've obviously not looked at before in the form of Decisive Targon or the Noxus Targon Aggro deck. I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel, so I'd love to hear from you guys and basically comment on the things you'd like to see from the channel next. I'm obviously going to have a little bit of time off work over Christmas, so I can actually dedicate more time to this channel and bring some super exciting stuff to you all. The data presented here is analysed by Bomber TV using MOBA Analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in a pinned comment and in the card above. What decks are you having the most luck with so far in patch 1.15? I would love to hear in the comments. Up next is patch 1.16 preview predictions, where Bomber and I will have a look at the buffs and nerfs we expect to happen in the upcoming patch. This will most likely be the last major buffs and nerfs ahead of the upcoming expansion, so these are going to be some really crucial important ones, so definitely a video to watch. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time guys.